I'm visible, yeah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Frank Peter. I will be moderating the second session of this workshop today. The theme of this panel is virtues and applied ethics. And we will hear 4 papers on this topic dealing with questions of environment, education, and medicine. The structure of the panel is as the previous one, so each presenter has 20 minutes to present the paper, and then after these 4 papers, we will have a Q&A session of about 40 minutes. Translation is available, and I think the link was sent out already. You can find the link in the chat. And if it's not working, please send us a message via chat. So I would like to start with our first presenter and briefly introduce her. You will find more information in the booklet, which was sent out, which you have received. So our first speaker is Dr. Zilio Grandi. She's professor of Arabic language and literature at the University of Venice. She's currently based in Abu Dhabi as director of the Italian Cultural Center. She graduated from the University of Naples in Middle East and Maghreb studies. Her field of specialization is Arabic literature, with a special focus on religious literature from the Islamic tradition. But she has also published on Christian writings. And among her publications, I would like to mention particularly her book, in Italian, The Virtues of the Good Muslim, which came out just last year. Today, she will speak on the place and shape of environmentalism in the Islamic moral orientation. Please, the floor is yours. If you unmuted. Yes.
Thank you so much, Frank Peter. Okay. I'm really honored by this invitation, and I would like to thank very much Dr. Mutaz and the conference organizers, really most sincerely. My contribution will start with a few linguistic remarks concerning environment and sustainability and the corresponding Arabic words bi'a and istidama. Then I will present the work of a few Arabic Muslim authors on these topics. And then I will try to outline the possibility of considering environmental awareness and related behavior as an Islamic virtue. It's still a work in progress, so be patient if it's not complete. So I was saying I would like to start with linguistic remarks, because I know we all know that when you go from one language to another, you never say the same things. So let us take the English word environment and the corresponding Arabic bi'a. When we say environment, we refer to the action of surrounding something. Quite similar is the etymology in other European languages, Neo-Latin and others. For instance, the Italian ambiente, from the Latin verb ambire, that is to be around on both sides. Or the German Umwelt, composed by around, and Welt, world. In contrast, the Arabic bi'a expresses the dwelling, the place to which one returns. The great medieval dictionaries offer as a synonym manzil. So it is clear that environment and bi'a imply 2 different ways of thinking about the human being in the world. On the one hand, with the environment, man is at the center as an absolute, surrounded by everything else that is outside him. On the other hand, with bi'a, man is inside the world, the place in which he has been placed, which welcomes him and waits for him as his home. Even more meaningful is the comparison between sustainability and istidama, the commonly adopted voice words in Arabic for sustainability, environmental or otherwise. Sustainability comes from the Latin verb sustinere and has the primary sense of to hold up a thing or a person by bearing their weight from underneath. Thus, it refers to effort and difficulty, to resistance against an adversity or an enemy. What is sustained is an unwelcome burden, even could be, so it's a bearing and has to do with heavy commitment and even suffering. Let us now think of istidama. Medieval Arabic dictionaries explain it by referring to the broad semantic field of duration, to continue, to remain or exist for a long time, unceasingly, constantly, always. We can confront da'iman, or in perpetuity. We can see dawam. Again, the comparison between sustainability and istidama reveals two different images of man in today's world and of his role. Where sustainability says that we must bear the burden of our environment, decayed and exhausted, on the contrary, istidama speaks of a possibly unchanging nature that must therefore be preserved as it is. Muslim scholars who observe environmental sustainability under the lens of religion and insist on the preservation of the natural world as an Islamic duty are increasingly numerous. Among them, Waiti Jabir al-Wanda, in a fine 2019 essay titled Mawqif al-Sharia al-Islamiyya min al-Istidama al-Bi'iyya, which highlights the contribution of the Sharia to the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. His work is representative of others, so I will pick up on its main points. The author mentions many passages from the Holy Book and some prophetic traditions, and on the basis of this, explains that the environment is a divine grace, ni'matullah, and therefore requires utmost care. So the Muslim shall avoid any abuse or over-exploitation of natural resources and shall not alter the perfect proportion, miqdar, and the perfect balance, tawazun, of the environment in which he lives, keeping in mind that Islam is the religion of moderation and equanimity, that is wasatiyya or i'tidal. Jabir al-Wanda then moves to the tools offered by the law and observes that the Sharia produces in the believer an awareness of the environment in which he lives, and in addition teaches him how to preserve the world and how to care for it. He talks about hifaz, of course, and ri'aya. Step by step, always with the help of quotations from the Holy Quran and the Sunnah, the author explains that environmentalism is an integral part of the ethical values and behavior conveyed by religion, that the principles and methods of law, together with the practical experience of jurists, make it possible to resolve every major ecological issue, and closes his remarks by calling for the involvement of religious institutions in finding suitable solutions to the challenges of the present, insisted on the concept of mas'uliyya mujtama'iyya, social responsibility. In the framework of his discussion, Al-Wanda dwells on the Quranic opposition between islah, so amendment or correction, and fasad or ifsad, corruption, the latter being an expression often used today to refer to environmental decay. He then quotes the Quranic prohibition against bringing corruption to the earth, al-fasad fil ard, and like many other contemporary authors, he understands both terms, fasad and islah, in an ecological sense, and thus rightfully includes the preservation of the environment among the ethical requirements of religion. Many contemporary Arab authors, referring to the Quranic prohibition against corruption corruptive earth, attest to a strongly negative view of the impact of men, especially Western men, on the world today, and claim, sometimes very polemically, the Islamic precedents on environmental issues. That is, they claim that prophetic teaching preceded Western ecological ideology and its political program by many centuries, so that if the Islamic world is afflicted by ecological problems today, this is attributed to the adoption of an alien lifestyle. This statement of an Islamic precedence, along with the blame for the Western way of life, also runs through, for example, another fine essay by the Yemeni economist Adil Abdel Rashid Abdel Razak. Published in 2017 and focusing on the Sunnah of the Prophet, it is titled Al-Manhaj al-Nabawi fi Ta'ziz al-Suluk al-Ijabi Tujah al-Bi'ah. According to the author, the reason why Muslim societies are currently plagued by environmental problems is the blind imitation of the faults of others, against the respect for the earth required instead by Islamic law. It is therefore necessary to promote a methodology of environmental education based on the lessons of the prophets, which can be fully described as Islamic. Obtaining the application of this methodology will not be difficult, he warns, since it is fundamentally a religious obligation, Islam Dini. Abdel Razak quotes many sayings of the Prophet and applies them to modernity through the use of analogy or qiyas. Among the many sayings taken up from an environmentalist perspective, two stand out from the others because they invoke the beautiful names, al-Asma al-Husna, the attributes that Islamic theological tradition acknowledges to divinity on the basis of the foundational texts. God is the beautiful and loves beauty, al-Jamil yuhibbul Jamal, this is the first, and the other one is God is the gracious or the gentle and loves gentleness, kindness, rafiq yuhibbu al-rifq. Through the words of the Prophet, the author thus calls the believer to respect the beauty of the world and the sensitivity of nature, but the example he points to is not that of the Prophet, it is that of God, which is remarkable because in doing so, although he does not seem to focus on it, he places environmentalism within the precise boundaries of Islamic virtue ethics. Indeed, it is true that the Muslim must conform himself to the model of Muhammad, but it is also true that the distinctive feature of the moral domain, with respect to the juridical one, lies in having as a model precisely the highest example, al-Mathal al-A'la, that is, the example of God with his attributes. The idea that Islamic ethics of virtue is inspired by the divine names and by the imitation, mutatis mutandis, of God, despite his obvious inimitability, originates in cases where the Quran or the Sunnah recognize the same quality in God. So sorry. I'm so sorry, dear colleagues. I was saying, yes, that this idea that Islamic ethics of virtue is inspired by the divine names originates in cases where the Quran or the Sunnah recognize the same quality in God and in human creatures. Thus, for example, the Islamic cardinal virtues include gratitude or shukr because the Quran applies shakur to both God and the good believer. Medieval theologians called such divine attributes equivocal, mutashabiha, or shared, mushtaraka, precisely because they can be communicated to humanity as God wills and allows, an idea that is also present in Christian theology with the notion of communicable divine attributes. Now, among the divine names, we also find Al-Hafiz, the keeper or the guardian or he who preserves many things. It is definitely a shared name, since the Quran mentions it several times in reference to God, but also in reference to human beings, like the Prophet himself and Joseph, son of Jacob. The medieval theologian and philosopher Al-Ghazali, in his famous work on the divine names, Al-Maqsad, comments on Al-Hafiz and praises the biological, chemical, and physical perfection of nature. He explains that God guards all living things, humans, animals, and plants, keeping their internal elements in balance, regulating contrasts, adding and recreating, and finally preserving each and every atom in the heavens and on earth. As for the man who is Hafiz, Al-Ghazali explains him as one who, by observing religion, guards himself in body and heart. Another prominent medieval theologian interested in the divine names and attentive to their possible transmission to virtuous men is Fakhreddin Al-Razi. Al-Razi explains that God is Al-Hafiz not only because he protects things from dissolution, but also because he remembers everything and therefore knows everything in general and in particular. Then he applies Hafiz to man and describes him as one who guards his rational faculty from suspicion and heresy, and his practical faculty from the assaults of lust and anger, knowing that virtue lies in the middle. Of course, the ethical, ecological understanding of the name Al-Hafiz and even its possible translation into the Islamic virtue of environmental consciousness is far removed from medieval and pre-modern Islamic thought. But it does not seem to be attested even today. Yet, employing the resources of Islamic theology and working on the example of past masters, it would be very easy to affirm the Islamicity of environmentalism and sustainability, and even Islamic precedents precisely through speculation on this name. What is surprising is that the authors I have consulted, much more in number than those I have named so far, continually resort to terms derived from the same verbal root as Al-Hafiz, such as Hifd, Hifad, Muhafada, and so on, when teaching the necessity of preserving and guarding the world, following the example of the Prophet. But do not take this decisive step. It could be objected that their training is not specifically theological, but juridical or other. However, it seems to me that the same deficiency, as far as I have been able to ascertain so far, could be observed among theologians. It is no exception, if I'm not wrong, because I didn't have the time to read everything actually, but I think it's not exception, Sayyid. Yet he strongly believes that the names are transmitted to the natural world, including man, and he is perhaps the first contemporary Muslim thinker to detect the environmentalist component in the Islamic religion. Nor is an exception Yusuf al-Qaradawi in his well-known 2001 essay titled Ri'ayat al-Bi'a fi Shari'at al-Islam, published in 2001, as I said. I have yet to fully investigate other works like the public lecture delivered by Ibn al-Uthaymeen at the University of Ibn Saad in 1998, or Syed Hussein Nasr in his Contemporary Islamic World and the Environmental Crisis, published in 2003. In any case, the ecological reading of the name Al-Hafiz does not seem to be detected even by teachers who take the names as models of human virtues, as is the case with the Syrian Muhammad Ratib al-Nabulsi in his Maswat Asma Allah al-Husna, published in 2014. I think I have still 1 second to sum up the results I have arrived so far. There is an increasing number of contemporary. Do I have time? Sorry, Frank. If I don't have time.
2.5 minutes.
1 minute.
2.5 minutes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can do it. So there is an increasing number of contemporary Arab Muslim authors who propose an environmentalist reflection in a religious view. A number of basic convictions can be observed in their works. First of all, the position of man in the world, which is felt as internal and not external to it. Secondly, a specific idea of sustainability, which is based on the durability of the world and not on the burden of its maintenance. The current environmental degradation is assimilated to the Quranic expression, corruption on earth, which is an object, of course, of absolute prohibition, but part of the divine plan. God has indeed endowed man with knowledge so that he could be able to cope with it. Repairing natural corruption and restoring the world to its original condition is therefore an ethical religious imperative of Islam. Another recurring theme is that of Islamic precedent in environmental matters. The various authors declare, or at least assume, that the Sharia guarantees the believer's environmental awareness and offers him all the necessary tools to live and work respecting and loving nature. It is therefore necessary to return to the prophetic method, spreading a wide Islamic alternative to Western ecologism, which, based on the founding text of the religion, is perceived as a religious obligation. Ecologism and commitment to environmental sustainability are thus among Islam's ethical and religious obligations. But in order to include environmental consciousness and its actions in the precise field of virtue ethic, a fundamental step is still missing. This is my opinion so far, I must add. Namely, the clear reference to the divine name Al-Hafiz, which also portrays a God who is in his own way environmentalist, a step that I am not aware has been taken so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ida, for this fascinating paper. If you have questions which you want to ask, you can either ask them directly in the Q&A session. Some have already sent questions through the chat. That's also possible. We will read them afterwards and discuss them afterwards.